Okay, so welcome back everyone to the Diary of an Intern. Today, my guest is someone who has spent more than 2 decades doing two things at once, whether it's communicating science at Urdu level or even studying it as a scholar on how audiences perceive science. He's an astrophysicist studying, working at the UMass and teaching a lot of different courses. And he's also the founder of Kainaat Studios, a platform where he's trying to build something that Pakistan never really had, an infrastructure for science content in Urdu, and I would highly recommend you all to check it out. So, Dr. Salman Hameed, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much.
One of the reasons that we usually talk about science communication here is because I believe that when people want to study science, they must know how to be able to communicate it to the wider audience. That is our responsibility as scientists. While publishing papers is for us talking to the scientist model, putting out content and outreach and activities to talk to not the general public. There are different kinds of public, but that is also our responsibility. So that connects me to our first question. When you started Science Ka Adda in 2015, you said nothing like it existed in Urdu. And now this has been 10 years, I believe. Do you still believe that? What do you think exists now within the science communication or science outreach sphere in Pakistan? And what still is not there?
Okay, so I'm going to both date me as well. So, so you'll know how old I am,
Okay.
but also clarify the particular aspect of that.
Mhm.
So, I grew up in some ways in the 80s,
Okay.
and newspapers were a big deal. So this is before the internet,
Mhm.
right? So newspapers at dawn and newspaper for English was a
Mhm.
big deal. And so at that time, so every Sunday, or every Friday actually. So there used to be sort of the weekend was actually Friday for
Mhm.
a while. So every Friday, the weekend edition of Dawn magazine had a science column, and it was by a writer called Azim Kidwai. I think he died in the mid 1990s, and that was great because there was always a space for an article about science in the major newspaper. So for me,
Mhm.
because I was interested in science, I was interested in astronomy, but in science in general, I really loved to read what would Azim Kidwai write this week. And he would,
Oh.
because he was a broad science writer, so it could be about biology, it could be about astronomy, it could be about history of science and whatever.
Mhm.
Nevertheless, there was a consistency to that because every week I would know there would be an article by Azim Kidwai about science.
Okay.
So this is in Pakistan, right? So this is where we're talking about sort of and I thought that was amazing. That helped me develop my interest further. I mean, my original interest also comes from Carl Sagan's Cosmos, which was shown on Pakistani television in 1984. But that was a medium was different. So when you are asking this question about what was in the to 2015 when I started Science Gadda, which was on Vimeo, but and that was because YouTube was banned in Pakistan at that time. So I was putting videos and I was shooting those in Green Studio in Hampshire College. Um, at the time, yeah, there wasn't much material on online, on in a video format. So
Mhm.
I wanted to differentiate between the fact that writing of science in public has been around, and I would give a huge credit to Azim Kidwai, who used to write regularly in Dawn, and later on, I would say that yes, for videos, very particular medium, that was different, and so now I would say there are because of the ease of making videos.
Mhm.
I also make it sort of videos have a portable green screen or sort of you don't even need green screen. You can do so much other ways. The cameras have gotten better. And so there is a proliferation of science channels in Urdu,
Mhm.
right? And so in Pakistan, there is more. I would also plug in because there are these different mediums. So you also have Science Ki Dunya, which is a Facebook page, which has, I forgot, a million sort of followers, subscribers, or whatever. That is just in Urdu. So there are various groups that are working in different media, and not to mention people who do like Science Fuse, for example, which works on actual taking science experiments to that, or Hassan Farid, who does sort of like, online courses on physics experiments and things like that. So there is a proliferation of it, and in many different ways, science is being communicated and so on and so forth. And I haven't mentioned Lahore Science Mela and others. So I'm going to
Course,
miss out a
yes.
bunch, but I'm just giving one of the ways of pulling these things out is that there are these different modes of communication. So Science Camila does something different. Hassan Farid with physics courses experiments on
Yep.
really clever scientific visualizing way. That's something different. Science ki dunya is something different. And then there are, for astronomy, there are a lot of amateur astronomical societies in Karachi, in Lahore, in
Yep.
Islamabad. They are doing something different of bringing telescopes, and we are doing something different with Kainaat Studios of bringing sort of like, for both kids and for adults, how to think about sort of like, about astronomy and space and so on and so forth.
Okay. I like how you trace it back to newspapers because yes, that is something that I'm so sorry. That is my alarm. Let me just shut it off. I believe that when you mentioned this thing about newspapers, I am someone who started reading about science in newspapers. Reader's Digest was the second upgrade I got, but that would be my father would bring it home, and that would be the only way that I would know about science in any other way. But Reader's Digest was designed in such a way that it would talk about these weird disease discoveries, right? And then connect it to how scientists found out this person has this disease and
Mhm.
how to be able to solve that. And however, you also mentioned this other like people doing their activities. I do not hear the word government, and we'll get back to that. Did you ever notice that there was a difference in how science was communicated or talked about in an Urdu newspaper and in an English newspaper?
Yes. I mean, look, and by the way, and there is a space outside of newspapers as well. And I think you also talked with the founders of Scientia magazine, for
Mhm.
example, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that is in English, and that is another space that comes in.
Hmm.
And I mentioned Science Ki Duniya, which also does that in Urdu, but like, on Facebook. Unfortunately, and I do mean it, unfortunately, that in Pakistan, there is this stratification in terms of languages, and
Hmm.
which
Yeah.
also maps onto the class structure.
Yes.
And so you have, in terms of schooling, you have Urdu medium, then you have English medium, and then you have the Cambridge system.
Hmm.
And usually that ties into social class, and that ties into what you would expect somebody to know about science,
Yep.
usually, not
Hmm.
always, but
Hmm.
usually. And so I would answer your question by saying something, that when I started the YouTube channel, or like, astronomy videos, and I was making these videos for talking about what are the current discoveries are in astronomy, but in Urdu. And
Okay.
so a lot of people actually said, why are you doing that? Right? It's like, that who's going, people in Pakistan, they don't follow stuff.
Yeah.
And for me, when I started doing that, I actually didn't know whether it's going to be successful or not. And
Okay.
the reason is, what you are getting at, right?
Yeah.
Because in some ways the question was, well, I'm if I'm doing it about cutting edge astronomy,
Hmm.
then the assumption is, which is, I think, false as well. The assumption is that, well, people in Pakistan who would be familiar or who would follow cutting edge astronomy, for example, they would not follow it in Urdu. And
Yes.
they would have access, because of class structure, they would have access to Neil deGrasse Tyson or Bill Nye, or other
Yeah.
people regarding that. Okay. And people who would follow it in Urdu, again, the assumption, which I think is false, would not understand, oh, the complex or cutting edge issues regarding astronomy.
Hmm.
So that was an experimental question for me, being a scientist. So for me, it was like, so a lot of people said, "Well, this won't work." And for me, the answer was like, well, first of all, there is a need for that, because as I mentioned, okay, so you do have Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example, for English audience. You do have Brian Cox, for example, in England, and so on and so forth. What you don't have is somebody having those conversations in Urdu. And the second thing was, that it's an experimental question because why not? Why not have, if you provide good quality in Urdu, so there is an assumption that you cannot provide good quality in Urdu, meaning to say people
Oh,
who
yeah.
want to know and who understand that, they will go to English. Well, why? Why not Urdu? Right?
Yeah.
So for me, the goal was to provide a quality of material that you are doing at the same level, I would say, that
Hmm.
is available anywhere in the world. That has nothing to, so that is not something that you go like, oh, because in Urdu, I'm going to degrade the quality of presentation or degrade the quality of visuals and so on and so forth. Why? So the result was, which I hoped, that would be, was that, well, at least as far as I can tell, people from both sides came, right? I mean, so
Yeah.
and I will be honest about it. A lot of people were very skeptical. Also, there's like, oh, why are you doing this and that? But overall, people find, okay, they can find something in Urdu about something that they are interested in, or about current news and things like that. And to me, the biggest aspect regarding that is that, but when they see, if they have a question, if they see a video from Neil deGrasse Tyson or somebody else, they're not gonna send him an email.
No.
They're not gonna look for, even if they find it, and he's probably not going to respond to them. If somebody email comes from Pakistan, yeah, but people look at me and they go like, he's our guy. And they send me emails, right?
Yeah.
And I love that, because uh I mean, okay, I should also say, not all emails are really great, but a lot of them are, but some emails get angry about one thing or another or something like that. That's true.
Yeah.
But they see, here is this guy who's speaking in Urdu. Here is this guy who's from Pakistan, and here is this guy. I can send him an email. I can find him online, his email, and send it to me. So
Yeah.
the way I talk about that is that reduces the barrier to learn, that reduces the barrier to communicate, and it also provides you with I mean, in some sense, they see you and they go like, oh, if he can do this, so can I. Or at least,
Yeah.
this is something that is achievable. This is not something completely foreign. So I
Yes.
think so those are, I think, the kind of things. And so to your, I will give you long, circuitous answers to your questions, but to your question about the difference between Urdu and English, within there, especially in Urdu newspapers. So again, so so there are some issues with that. There used to be different types of Urdu newspapers, meaning to say, some were more sort of straightforward, and some were more colorful. And same thing with
Yeah.
English too, but it was on the case, it was a lot more with Urdu. So, I mean, I think because of that class stratification, the quality of science was usually at the time better in English than in Urdu. Nevertheless, online, there was Dawn Urdu, there was BBC Urdu, and those,
Hmm.
they actually do a pretty good job. And in theory, you don't see actually much difference in terms of the quality of articles. And this is particularly for Dawn, for the internet era, that newspapers that have online sites. I have seen terrible articles in English language newspapers, and I've seen really good articles about science in Urdu, sort of online newspapers and things like that. So it has become sort of like more even in that sense. But I think overall, because of the structural issues, historically, English science articles have been better. But just go and see Science Ki Dunya. I mean, they actually do a pretty good job. So that's in
Yes.
Urdu.
Hmm. I agree with you because a lot of what you've mentioned has been researched by environmental journalists, where they talk about how much space they're given in an Urdu newspaper to write about science problems, and how much space English newspapers have. Like English newspapers cater to the need of science and science literacy. And I agree that the public perception about Urdu is that Urdu is very difficult and it's very difficult to learn and understand. And while that may be true, that's not because of Urdu. That's just because of the education system where English is preferred more than Urdu. And that still exists, unfortunately. So, but I'm glad that you went into the depth of it because yes, when people talk about the differences in, how science is communicated in both English and Urdu, it's a layered answer instead of just a straightforward answer. Okay. So I
Can I add one more thing to that
Yeah,
because
sure.
of what you just said towards the end, and that is also about uh, the translation issue, right?
Yes.
So a lot of the terms are in there, and so this is another thing that I've gotten quite a bit about people. So my goal is, and so I guess this is one of the key things in your videos as well, and that is about science communication.
Mhm.
So people ask me, okay, so you do it in Urdu, and this is something that I've gotten consistently. Like, somebody would comment on, well, that's great. Why are you using the word whatever, like, proton, or why are you using the word galaxy or whatever, like, whatever
Yeah.
you word use, right? And why don't you translate everything? Okay, now my response to that particular question is, and again, so there is a historical aspect to that. Well, we were colonized, and so we speak English, right? Like, and the education system and so on and so forth. So again, so there are, without uh, getting into whole all of that issue, that why do we have Urdu English split, and why do we have don't have good science translations for every word, and even when we do, we don't have familiarity. So I use the word Nizam Shamsi, which is for solar system, easily, because I think people actually get that. But I'm not going to use the word sort of like, for Venus or for Mars. Actually, Marikh people know more, but there are others that people don't know. So
Yeah.
if my purpose is science communication, not science translation,
Hmm.
then for me, the issue is, and that's what my answer to when people say, why don't you translate every word?
Yeah.
And my issue is that my goal is how people will understand. So if people
Yeah.
understand with a mixture of English language word or English words in it, I want to use those words rather than to come up with translations of everything where nobody understands, because you go like, I don't know what are these Urdu words. So for me, that's a primary thing, is for audience to understand what the scientific concepts or scientific context,
Hmm.
not, okay, it has to be in a particular language.
Yes.
And I think that is the case. I mean, I do science communication in the US as well. I mean, I have a radio show here locally. I tend to use English over there. Now, if I say I'm going to use Urdu because I'm from Pakistan, well, that would defeat the purpose of actually communicating science to this
Yes.
audience. So in the same
Mhm.
way, if people in Pakistan speak with English words embedded in those, I am trying to speak with those English words embedded in it, because for science communication, the issue is about how you understand things, not a literary or translation aspect to that.
I'm glad that you summarize it to this extent that the goal of science communication is not to translate everything, it's to understand your audience and cater to their language models that they use. So, I want to ask you, you've already noticed that you mentioned a lot of the science communication and outreach in Pakistan is carried by these charismatic individuals like you. And then we have Hood Boy, we have the Science Show magazine, we have Science Caravan, we have Science Fuse, etc. What do you believe that because these people are running on the sole motivation to educate the public, and of course, so are you. What do you think what happens when this goes on for a long run and there's still no institution supporting them? Because for the longest time, we know there are some organizations, Pakistan Science Foundation, they want to help. They're doing their best. However, most of it is now very slow and static because of our country is under a lot of political instability and economic stuff. So, what do you think happens in the long run? Is this a sustainable model, like letting the people go for science communication without anyone supporting them?
Well, I'm going to answer it in a slightly different way. As you know, I'm going to answer you in a circuitous way.
Yeah.
So Can it go on for a long time? I actually think it can. And the reason I would give you is the fact that I look at the glass half full to a
Mhm,
certain degree. And
mhm,
the way I look at that is that uh, now there are a lot more people who are doing science communication in Pakistan than they were 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 30 years
mhm,
ago, right? I also see there is a much broader interest in science, which
mhm,
is happening, and that you can see sort of like, the indicators would be from like events like Lahore Science Mela, for example, which get in 2 days, it can get sort of like, tens of thousands of people. Or if you look at the proliferation of, again, something that I'm more familiar with, astronomical societies, and when they have events, people come in and things like that. So I think those are indicators that this is thriving. And
mhm.
also for some people, I mean, like, it also is successful enough to have a potential career option, like as science
Yeah.
communicator in Pakistan. So those
Mhm,
are all indicators of going in a positive direction. So the way I look at it is that the landscape of science communication in Pakistan is actually maturing. It's maturing because there are people who, splattering of people, a couple of people doing it too. There are these organizations that are now communicating work, and they are supported by donations, by fees, by various ways, but that it is enough of a there is enough of support in it, or enough of an interest in it, that they can get supported by it,
yeah.
right? and
Mhm,
and that is, and again, I love sort of like, the fact that there are so many different ways of doing it, right? And so then
yes.
people are doing it in, and so you don't have just one mode of doing it, you don't have one individual doing it, but you have these many different types of things now. And by the way, I should also mention, and again, in the private sector, but you also have Daud Foundation's Magnificence Science Museum
Yeah.
that is in
Mhm,
Karachi. There
mhm.
is another science museum now in Lahore. That again, and I think people don't know about these things, but those are phenomenal places uh, for out of school science, for science in general. And I haven't been to the one in Lahore, but Magnificence Center in Karachi, I mean, that's fantastic. It's like, it has three or four floors over there of a lot of interesting stuff, all the way from sort of like, how mangroves grow to electricity works, how magnetism go, and to sort of like, health, and to astronomy. All of those things are there. That's also science communication, but again,
Mhm.
it's in the private sector.
Yeah.
So where you are getting at is, well, do you think that doing the way people are doing it without government support, can it sustain itself? So I would my answer to that would be yes, it has. That's how it has gone, right? You don't
Yeah.
even expect that. Now, Pakistan Science Foundation, interestingly, they still have outreach. I'm not familiar uh, in details about what they are doing, but I remember back in the late 80s, early 90s as well, they used to have, which I think they still do, a portable planetarium. Like, so they
Mhm.
would go and they would take those to villages and show and things like that. Now, some other groups also do that. They also have outreach and the government has outreach in STEM events. For example, this is science, technology, engineering, medicine, like, those type of things, or mathematics. They do it in various schools, especially in the interior, and so on and so forth. So I think that is happening. So I don't want to discount that. And that is also oftentimes that is related to the government, right? I
Mhm.
don't want to discount that. The reason is because a lot of science communication that we have talked about in the beginning, that is often very urban centered, right? I mean, those are
Yeah.
in Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad, like, maybe Peshawar, Hyderabad, and Quetta, but predominantly in these urban centers, we don't go out that much, right? But that's where Pakistan Science Foundation, to whatever it does, and I'm not saying, oh, this is the amazing model. I'm just saying I don't I do want to give credit to the structural way the government comes into certain places where these private groups cannot,
True.
right?
Yeah.
Now there
Mhm.
is still a question whether they do a good job or not. right? I mean, like, so that's a separate question, and but they do something, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, in an idealized world, what you would want is that kind of an outreach is actually more systematic and at a higher level,
Hmm.
and sort of like that probably is not there yet, and that would be a huge benefit. But I think there is I mean, Pakistan is still in a rural country. So when
Yeah.
we are talking about urban stuff, yes. So there is a need for everyone. I mean, one good thing in a negative way, but one good thing is that there is a lot of need. So whether for science or not, it hasn't reached a saturation level that so many people are doing science communication that there is no place for people to reach. We are nowhere close to that. So
Yeah.
would government doing it in cities and in other would help? Absolutely. And in fact, a more systematic structure, if the government has, that would actually benefit a lot. But there is a lot of need to do that, and in some ways, I just wanted to differentiate between the urban and rural outreach. I think where in the rural areas, I don't think a lot of the private groups reach to that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the individuals are not also able to reach rural areas, and this is where using the youth as a the youth can get anywhere apparently, which is fun. They understand the different media that is coming out. They understand social media so much faster. And you talked about it. You talked about the new mediums that are coming out. I have a question about the elephant that's probably in the next room, and is the AI generated media. And this I have for you is because you've been in this field longer than I have, and you've seen the progression from paper to print to internet, etc. And I recently came across this website, which was from Pakistan, and it was all AI generated material. The pictures were AI generated, the blog was AI, but it was doing what it's supposed to be doing, science communication. And that posed this question for me. Now, whose science do I trust, an AI or a person? And of course, when I compared it with Science magazine, where I know actual people are writing it and students are putting it hours of editing to be able to put out a blog, and there are people who are reading it extensively, and then there's this just blog that exists. What do you think AI generated media, will it widen the trust gap that we have in the global South science communication? Like, or is it something that we can use as a cheap tool to at least start some spark of interest in science?
Um, okay, so I have very strong opinions about that.
I would like to
Okay,
know. Yes.
and I think AI is going to be the downfall of all of us, not because of that the AI overlords are going to dominate us, but it's going to because the model that is behind it, it's a deeply profit-oriented capitalistic model,
Mm-hmm.
and it is about extracting every penny that you have, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, in order to make profit out of that. And right now, AI companies, we are just seeing the beginning of it, but the fact that AI companies are they're investing so much money in it, well, the bill is also going to come for it,
From
right?
our pockets, yeah.
And and in some sense, so what you are asking is a fundamental question about science communication. I'm in the battlefield, right? Because a lot of the material is being scraped off. It's not just the written material. I mean, I write also, so I've written for Dawn Tribune, Express Tribune, I mean, Express Tribune, etc., etc. So written material has also been scraped, but so have the videos, right? So I mean, that was a big thing when Google, because they need large language models, need data,
Mm-hmm.
and and one of the reasons why it's not as accurate is because they kept on going in. Initially it started with high quality data, control data, but now then they needed more and more data. So this is open AI model, and then they started going for Reddit, sort of like discussion forums and so on and so forth, because they needed data. So when people say, well, AI is spouting some racist stuff, well, I mean, it depends upon where the data is coming from, right? And when Google wanted to have more and more data, they figured out they can actually get data from videos, and there are a lot of videos out there. So all of that material is out there. So I'll take the question in two different ways. One is, well, I mean, can it be used in positive way? Can it be used? Yes, absolutely. It can be used in positive ways. Like, look, there are very specific tasks that it can do. Protein folding is a great example that people often use, but
Mhm.
so are about languages that can be preserved. So can be like, that you can actually have, you can go somewhere and it's auto translates for you in your AirPods and so on and so forth. So there are positive things that AI can be used, and that genie is out of the box. I mean, that will happen actually, like,
Yeah.
and the larger problem, I think, structurally, and I'm now dealing with science communication. There are a lot of other issues, exploitation of resources. There are all of these other things coming. I'm not going to go into that, but more in terms of science communication. Recently, Google made it that if you go for search stuff on their search engine, and Google is the largest search engine in the world, well, it's going to give you AI summary right in the top,
Yes.
right? And initially, I was also not doing it. Like, and I was like, no, I'm not going to go to that. But it's easy, and so you are going to go to that, right? And slowly, and that's the whole point. I mean, like, people say, well, it's like addiction and social media. Well, it's up to you how to fight it. Well, over there, they have tens of thousands of people, or at least thousands of people, that have built a system understanding various stuff in terms of human psychology to get you addicted to scrolling.
Yes.
I, as an individual, have a very hard time resisting that because I'm one person fighting against those thousand
Exactly.
who are designing that system, right? How come suddenly the responsibility is on me to fight scrolling?
Yeah.
So, in the same way, I also now go to when I'm doing Google search, am I going to take 5 steps and say, no, 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 this, I just wanted to know, for example, who sort of like, starred in a particular movie. Okay. Now I get this easy answer right up on top with the AI. I can move on from there, right? Like, the underlying problem is that, say, for example, for science communication, you ask this question, oh, is there methane? Has methane been detected on Mars? So that's an interesting aspect. Like, short answer is yes. And it's a really
Yes.
interesting aspect to that. But why there is methane and is it cyclical? Is it sign of life or not? And there is a lot of debate about that, right? So you ask this question. Now, there are articles about it. There are by science communicators, by science writers, by the people who have written about it. Okay, now AI gives you this answer right in the summary, like, that. Now, if you have good eyesight, you can squint, and in those AI answers now with the Google, there's going to be a tiny little link that would be there. Now, most people don't click on that tiny little link of where that came from
Yep.
because you figured it out, the basic answer, you moved on.
Yeah.
Two issues. Well, AI has scraped that information, and it still depends upon the validity of it, quality of it, depends upon where it has scraped that material from.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one. It could be wrong. And actually, if you know something, it sometimes is. I don't know what fraction of it is because we don't have peer-reviewed studies about this yet. And by the way, these AI companies don't release peer-reviewed studies. They don't do it because they don't have to, right? Because they're private. So that's part one, that it could be correct. But there is a lot of faith in AI. Why? Because it's AI, right? And so, yeah, but it depends upon where it's scraping the data from. But people say, but AI told you, right? Second problem, that information was scraped from some article that somebody else wrote. And one way people used internet as a business model was that, okay, so if you have a science magazine, so for example, Scientia or somebody else, like, one way they are going to make revenue because there is an effort that has gone into writing an article. There is an effort that has gone into, for example, doing research and then producing good quality content. You can also produce bad quality content, but I'm just saying, if you have done it's a good quality science article about methane on Mars. You have spent time doing research, you have spent time learning about it, and then you have spent your time on presenting it in a manner that general public understands.
Yes, true. Hmm.
And you oftentimes these internet magazines or internet or including news websites as well, newspaper websites too, they rely on advertising.
Hmm.
They rely on sort of like, ads that come in. Those ads are dependent upon the number of views you get, the number of visitors you are getting to that site.
Hmm.
Now, what AI has done in that scraping is that it's got your article about methane on Mars and got the gist of it and presented it as a summary when somebody was asking for what the answer to that is. Now, in theory, your if you have a good site and if people go over there in a Google search, your site would come up. And people are going to be, oh, here is that. I'm going to click on that and go to that site. When you go to that site, you count as a visitor. The ad companies go like, oh, you know what? This is a good site. Actually, people come over there. We are going to give you revenue based upon how many visitors you are getting.
Yep.
If AI cuts that out, which it is, we know actually, Universe Today, one of the astronomy magazines, their viewership just plummeted 2 years ago when actually this started to happen. So, and that's just one example. I mean, this is happening all over. Fine, AI is cutting you off. What's the issue? Well, the issue is that if you cannot fund people, if you cannot have people write those articles, if you cannot pay them, which they were being paid by these ads, right now it's fine. But 5 years later, when there was going to be a follow-up on methane on Mars story, who's going to write it?
No one.
Where are you going to scrape that material? Because scraping is the thing that is making AI useful.
Yes.
And so to me, apart from it being morally wrong, because nobody is being asked this question, hey, can I scrape your data? Nobody is asking that question, right? And nobody is paying to the writers whose data is being scraped. And so I feel very strongly about that. It is a moral issue. I mean, I think to a certain degree, it's stealing,
Yes,
right?
it
Like,
is.
what they are doing. And B, you are basically cutting your own limbs in order to do that because you would not have a way to stand once you have scraped the data and you have compromised the people who were actually doing that. So, long answer to your question about, well, what do I think about the internet, the AI generated content for Pakistan in science? It's a shortcut, but like any shortcut, because in life there are no shortcuts. Like, I mean, you
Fortunately.
are going to be left with, first of all, you are doing that at the expense of Pakistani websites like Scientia, for example, or other channels that are out there. And even you do all of that, and you still, I don't think you can rely on the quality of the content because it depends upon, we know AI hallucinates, we know its quality has issues, and it also depends upon where you are scraping it from.
Hmm.
So you have to be skeptical about that. But ultimately, I think and again, and I'm just talking about the moral issue more from the way it scrapes the data, not to add to the issue in terms of its generation of electricity that it takes for AI, the water use, and so on and so forth. So these are all of these other things. For what? Right? I mean, if the quality was so good, that would be something else. But it is coming at the expense of other people and at the backs of the work of other people that they are doing. So sorry, but I feel very strongly about it.
Glad that you mentioned it. I think informally, informally, viewership also counts as verification. So the more people
Yeah.
that read a blog, it counts as okay, it is at some point, an attestment of like, yes, the quality is good. And now if no one is reading it and it's just out there, it means anyone can put anything out there and it will be put into this whole feeding model. I'm glad that you talked about this because I am someone who believes that AI is just a tool. AI is just something you can play around with. It's good that you understand it. It's better that you know both the pros and cons of something so that you can build an opinion again as a science communicator, but also understand the pitfalls. This brings me to one question that I always want to ask people who are doing science communication is that there's a lot that can be done in science communication. And one of the thing is money talks. When you give people money, you see where they put their money. And I always judge people based on where they're putting their money, right? So yes, of course, you cannot see where their money is actually going, but I can see what matters to them. And so if someone, a founder or someone says, okay, I will give you all the resources, all the money you need. I need to know what is it that you're going to use it on to advance science communication and outreach in Pakistan? How would you use that money? Yes, I will be judging you on that answer.
Okay, so that's a tricky question. I mean, in the sense that I mean, everybody thinks that what they are doing is amazing, like,
Mhm.
and so I will do what I'm doing. Well, I mean, I think development of an ecosystem
Okay.
would be better, right? So again, so it depends upon how you look at science communication.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the way I look at it, and that is a focus on building wonder and curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
not about communicating facts and science.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is a difference to that. Um, I think people can actually get facts in many different ways, right? Like, and but I think the harder problem comes in building an interest in learning about the world or the universe,
Yeah.
right? Because that is a broader thing that lets you as sort of like let somebody go in like because I'm interested in this stuff, I want to learn more rather than, well, the universe was 13 and a half billion years old. Like, okay, fine, but like and that's a fact, but I want to understand how universe changed or what happened in the early few seconds or early few minutes of the universe. Well, that is a really interesting question, right?
Yes.
So it's the question of curiosity and wonder. To me, those are the central component to that. So if there was a donor, for example, or whoever, like, they say, okay, well, I want to give you bazillion rupees uh, for uh, for science communication. What you want to do with that? I would go for an infrastructure and to develop or an ecosystem that focuses on curiosity and wonder and in multiple media, right? I mean, so for example, it's when somebody gets interested in it. And as we have talking about it, and I think I again want to re-emphasize the bit about that how people are communicating in many different ways, whether it's online courses, whether it's on Facebook group, whether it's in sort of like doing science activities in there. I think that kind of an infrastructure where various things are connected together would be the way to fund stuff. So you are, and again, I create, or with Kainaat Studios, we create video content, right? So of course, like, I would like sort of like, okay, so people are impacted by visuals quite a bit. Like, there is a
Mm-hmm.
reason why film and television is actually so crucial. Visual medium is actually, you can communicate a lot more through visual medium. So of course, like, that, oh, can we have sort of like, higher end documentaries, higher end production that deals with sort of like, sophisticated thing. But for what? For building curiosity and wonder. But so do you do need, but but it's not enough because somebody who gets interested in it, and again, these are questions that we get. I want to learn more. Yeah. Okay. So linked to that, okay, so how do you bring in slightly higher level of content? And that could come from, I mean, if we are focusing on public science, I would say a really good quality museum and planetarium. I mean, I think that is a place where people actually go to actually do that. And in the same way, you can have that space where you can have people who do like science views and others who actually do experiments and things like that, that can come with that. And within the same kind of an infrastructure thing, you can actually have its output as magazines or other types of things that can go through that. So to me, it's the building of a scientific or cultural curiosity, culture of curiosity. That would be something. If there is a lot of money that can, like, yeah, let's build a culture of curiosity in there using science, using astronomy, using whatever fields, biology or agriculture and things like that. But let's build a culture of curiosity. How do you do that? You do need money for that, but there are different ways of doing that. So something let me give you well, two examples. One is, so you can go to I mean I'm in the US, so there are a lot of advantages in a certain way. But if you go to England, London, the museums are free. In the US, there are a lot of good museums, but they're not free. They become expensive. So if you have a family of three or four, you go to a museum, it's very expensive. That should not be the case, right? But alongside with that, the second example I wanted to give was I had a chance to go to Shanghai Planetarium 2 years ago. And fun fact, it's actually quite far from Shanghai City. It's actually a little bit farther away. But it's not just a planetarium, it's a whole science center. It's an astronomy center over there. It is incredible. Meaning to say, I've never seen a science center, astronomy center like that, both in terms of the quality of presentation and in terms of the level that it reaches, because it reaches from a layperson who's being exposed to ideas of the universe for the first time, beautiful ways, to graduate students, because you can actually have there are a lot of these interactive stuff that actually takes you to a very high level. You can spend days over there. You can, and actually the person who is the director of it, I knew him, and he told me that that actually professors actually do bring their students with them, and because you can actually play around with actual science in there, so on and so forth. And they took over 10 years to build that. I think 12 years to build that.
Long
And
time.
It's a long time. There's a lot of thought involved in it. And there is a lot of art in it as well. I mean, I think so, so it's not just purely from the science perspective. There's a lot of commissioned art and so on and so forth. So my point is that how do you build a culture of curiosity? That is a hard question. But I think if there is a way to do that, that would be the way to use the funds. That it's not just about sort of science, but it's about building curiosity and wonder. And I think there are some places I mean, one of my favorite places forever in Karachi was the second floor, T2F, which was founded by Sabine, Sabine Mahmood. And to me, it was a small space, but always much more enriching than anything else. I mean, for me, it was a whole universe because you could the conversations you had over there, the type of things you had were really enriching. And so, I mean, so how do you build that element of wonder and curiosity? That I think would be the question. And I think if you have a structure like that from in Pakistan, in big cities at least, I mean, there used to be a planetarium, and they are in shambles in Karachi, Lahore, Peshawar. There were supposed to be three planetarium, so it's possible. Dowd Foundation's Magnificent Science Center, that's there. But bring it together. Bring it these things together where people feel that this is a place of wonder and learning and curiosity and fun all together.
Yeah. I think that science begins with curiosity and it leads to a lot of fun stuff that make you it's good to wonder. It's good to have questions. It's good to be optimistic. And I think this is one of the things that I'm glad you mentioned is that there's a lack of infrastructure. So putting money there, but not with the goal of just, oh, teaching people more stuff, is to make them curious. And you said something about the point of contact, like they want to know more and you want to work on it. And the examples that you gave about building a community or like museums or public places where people can talk about these things, they can continue to learn from it. That is something that requires both the government and charismatic individuals like yourself. Well, that brings us towards the end of our podcast. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you would like to add that I did not ask you?
No, I think it's a fascinating conversation. I would just add one thing at the end, and that it is about people shortchanging the audience. And that goes from newspapers to television stations to government funding for public science things. People think, oh, if you're talking about science, A, the assumption is that science would be boring. And the other assumption is that nobody would be interested in that, right? And I think both of those or it's going to be too hard, right?
Hmm.
I think all three things are not necessarily true. And people actually shortchange it right from the get-go. They don't give it a shot. They don't give it a try for that. And what I mean by that is that even when we are talking about these public spaces, if they go like, oh yeah, well, let's not make it too complicated, like,
Hmm.
because people are gonna. So what you do is you use the prestige of science or the use of science simply for your profits,
Yeah.
right? And so it's like, oh, so here is a ride that is going to tell you about five stars or whatever, like, and it's just a merry-go-round that actually has these constellations around it. You can make that, and you can actually make an argument that it is for science, but that is not what science, but that is, I think, the misuse and for profit. So, but I think what people should understand is that if you present it right, there is people get interested in those issues because at least I'm talking about from astronomy perspective, people are always interested in the questions of origins. People are
Yeah.
always interested in the questions of what do I look up? And
Mhm.
those are not new questions. It is humanities questions, like, for hundreds of thousands of years, because we've always looked up, right?
Yeah.
Like, like, what is that? Why is that? So there is a fundamental level of curiosity that we all have. And so you can actually tap into that, but
Hmm.
we don't need to cheapify it. We don't need to say, oh, this will be too complicated. Or this is science if you have these sort of like, painted five-pointed stars. Well, no, that is not science, but you can have real science. Like, so I think that understanding that you can do both, you can communicate good science and do it in an interesting way, which can capture people's imagination like anything.
Yes.
Like, like a movie. Like, you can have a bad movie or you can have a really excellent movie, but it depends on how you make it. But it's not movie. It's not like, oh, people are not going to watch movie. No, people can do that communication stuff. But if you give it a chance, if you a priori, if you say nobody's going to come to that, yeah, then you're never going to make it. You're never going to try it.
Yeah. I think I use the word dumbify
Yeah.
science, you lose public trust when you dumbify science for them. You basically showing them, oh, you're too dumb, unfortunately, to understand the science. So we're going to change a little bit of science. We're going to change
You're
the
not
truth.
you're not respecting them.
Yeah,
Like,
and
you're not
that's very
respecting their intelligence. Yeah.
exactly. And
Yeah.
it instead of building a bridge, you're breaking it, even at the
Yeah.
starting point.
That's exactly right.
Um, I like that. I think that's something that's a good conclusion to this whole conversation is that understand the audience, and stop worrying about them. Let them decide whether they're ready to take the information, whether they're interested. Start the conversation and keep it going. And if you come around an audience that actually does not understand your science, it's okay. They might not be the audience for it, but one day they will be. One day we might get the message across. Thank you so much, Dr. Salman Hameed. This was excellent. I am so glad that I got to interview you. And the way you answered my questions I know you think that you're giving me long answers. Those answers are very informative for us to understand what is being done, what we can do in the future. And that gives me hope. So thank you so much for agreeing for this podcast.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, a lot of fun talking about it.
I'm glad. Thank you.